happening, they often run back to the very life they were meant to outgrow. The collective unconscious, the inherited architecture of human experience, music, the archetypes that a culture writes onto a person before they are music, old enough to choose differently. You did not just inherit who does not complain, the person who pushes music through. These are not personal instructions. They are cultural scripts that run so deep, most people, music never question whether they wrote them. And the trouble with living inside an archetype you never consciously chose is this. You can succeed completely at being it and still feel like you are disappearing. Elena, a brilliant lawyer, a caring mother, a successful woman who did everything, music, perfectly, according to every available role model. And standing before that mirror at age 41, she felt music less authentic than at any other time in her life. Not because she failed in the script, because she mastered it, because she gave the best performance of her life. And now she no longer finds herself music behind it. This is not a crisis. This is music. What Jung called the beginning of individuation. The moment the soul decides music, it will no longer live inside a story written by someone else. The moment music, the real person, the one buried under decades of performance, begins to push music toward the surface. Snorts. It does not feel like awakening at music first. It feels like something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. You have simply outgrown the coat. 2. When everything stops making sense. The stage in the alchemical music process where the base material has to decompose completely before music can be transformed into something of genuine value. The alchemists' music understood something that our self-improvement culture has systematically forgotten. You cannot refine gold from ore without first breaking down the ore. The structure has to music dissolve. The original form has to be surrendered, and that dissolution looks from every angle like pure loss. Jung wrote, music, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. He was not being poetic. He was describing a mechanism. The pain you are experiencing is not a signal that something is music going wrong. It is the signal that something is going right. Something your music ego does not want. Something your ego will fight with. Music, everything it has. Here is the distinction that changes everything. The ego, music, does not want transformation. The ego wants improvement. It wants to become a better version of itself. Music, while remaining fundamentally the same. It wants to add new capabilities. Music, new relationships, new achievements, new perspectives to its existing structure without ever questioning whether music, that structure, needs to come down entirely. Every self-help book, every productivity system, music, every 3-step program promising rapid transformation, they all speak to the music ego. They promise that you can get to the other side without going through the middle. Music, that you can have the new chapter without allowing the old one, music, to actually end. Jung would have looked at all of it, music, and recognized it as what it is. The ego's desperate attempt to avoid the one thing that could actually transform music, it. Think about what happens in nature during winter. Everything above ground goes dormant. Music. The landscape looks barren, lifeless. If you did not understand seasons, music, you would assume the earth was finished producing anything. But underneath that frozen surface, the soil is restructuring itself. Root systems are deepening in ways they never could, music, during the busy growing season. The apparent death is the condition for the next period of growth. Elena spent 6 months trying to fix what she was feeling. Every solution worked briefly. None of them touched the actual thing. She described it later this way. She said it felt like she was rearranging furniture in a house that needed to be rebuilt from the foundation. She was right. And the moment she stopped trying to rearrange the furniture was the moment everything finally began. 3. The 4 signs you are already crossing over. Jung did not only describe this threshold period in philosophical language. He documented specific psychological markers, things he observed consistently across hundreds of patients that appeared in people who were approaching a major life transformation. Music. These markers are almost always misread by the people experiencing music them, by their families, sometimes even by therapists who do not understand what they are witnessing. They look like symptoms of something going wrong. Music. They are actually signs of something going right. Here are the 4. The first is a hollowing out of music, things that used to carry meaning. You wake up and the life you have built, music, the one that met all the criteria, feels like a theater set for a production that already closed. You go through the motions because you do not know what else to do. The emotional current that music used to run through your routines, your goals, your relationships has thinned music to almost nothing. People around you do not notice because you are still performing, but inside you feel as music, though you are watching your own life from a slight distance through glass, and what you see no longer makes sense to you. Jung recognized music this as the psyche withdrawing its energy from the structures the ego built. When something music has completed its function in your psychological development, the life force, music, begins pulling back from it. Think of the way sap retreats, music from branches in autumn. The branches do not break. They just go quiet, and the energy that used to flow through them begins pooling somewhere, music deeper, preparing to fuel something you cannot yet see or name. The second marker is an uprising from places you thought music were settled. You start dreaming vividly, dreams that music feels significant even when they resist explanation. Music, memories surface that you have not thought about in decades. Emotions arrive, music, with no apparent cause. You cry without knowing why. You feel waves of anger that do music not connect to anything happening in your present life. Old wounds you believed you had healed begin aching again, music, as though they had only been sleeping. This is the unconscious making its move. When the ego's grip on music consciousness loosens, when the old identity starts losing its authority, everything that was compressed underneath that identity begins rising. Music. Every feeling you set aside because you did not have time for it. Every part of yourself you rejected in order to fit music into the life you were building. All of it starts coming up, and the pressure behind it is enormous because it has been held down for years, sometimes for music decades. The third marker is an intense, almost physical need for solitude that no one in your life understands. Music. You cancel plans. You need more time alone than you ever have. Music. Social situations that used to feel natural begin to feel like they are taking something essential, music, from you. You are not depressed. Exactly. You just cannot be around other people without sensing that something important is leaking out of you. Like every interaction requires you to perform a version of yourself that is becoming impossible to sustain. Jung music understood this as the psyche conserving its resources. Transformation requires enormous internal energy, and the psyche begins redirecting that energy away from external engagement and toward the interior work that is underway. Music. Your need for solitude in this period is as legitimate as the body's need music for stillness during illness. Something inside you is being music rebuilt. The rebuilding requires the energy you have been giving away to everything and everyone else. The fourth marker is the one that frightens people most, and it is the music one most commonly misdiagnosed. It is not simply music that your tastes change or your goals lose their pull, though those things, music, happen too. It is something stranger and more specific than that. It is the arrival of feelings and impulses and desires that you have spent your whole life refusing to acknowledge. A restlessness that does not belong to your current life. A strange grief for a version of yourself you never allowed music to exist. An inexplicable envy not of what other people have, but of how freely music some people seem to be living. Jung called what you are encountering here the shadow. The parts of music, the self that were rejected or suppressed, not because they were evil, but because they did not fit into the persona music you were building. The creative impulse you set aside because it was not practical. The need for freedom you buried because responsibility, music, demanded otherwise. The authentic emotional life you flattened because it made other people uncomfortable. He wrote music this, and it is worth sitting with. He wrote, "One does not music become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The darkness that music is arriving is not your enemy. It is the part of you that has been waiting music the longest. The unlived self knocking from the inside, not to destroy what you have built, to demand that you finally let it exist." If you are sitting music with 2 or 3 of these markers right now, you are not broken. You are not falling apart. You are standing music at the threshold, and what happens next depends entirely, music, on one thing: whether you can resist the pull to retreat back to the familiar before the new thing has a chance. Music to form. 4. The gap between 2 music breaths. This is where most people lose the transformation that is trying to happen. Not during the hollowing out or the rising of old pain, but in the silence that comes after, when the old structure is gone or going and the new one has not yet arrived. When there is nothing left to hold on to and nothing visible to move music toward. Jung described this as a kind of psychological freefall, and that is exactly what it feels like. The goals that once organized your days have dissolved. The identity you used to navigate the world has lost its coherence. The story, music you told about who you are and why your life matters has stopped music making sense, and you are left in a void that the ego experiences as music, the most threatening thing it has ever encountered, because snorts, the ego survives through structure, through knowing, through having a plan, music, a role, a reason. When all of that is stripped away, music, the ego, goes into a primal panic. This is not a metaphor. Neuroscience tells us that the human brain is hardwired for loss aversion. The fear of losing what we have is neurologically twice music, as powerful as the anticipation of gaining something equivalent. The brain registers this kind of identity dissolution, the music, same way it registers physical danger, and it responds accordingly with every survival mechanism it has ever developed. This is the moment when people call the former partner, take the job they music know will make them miserable, rebuild the persona they music had finally started shedding, make peace with the life that was slowly suffocating them music, because at least that life has a shape they recognize. Jung watched this happen constantly. He would see someone standing at the very edge of genuine change, the old life crumbling, the new self stirring underneath. And then they would music panic. They would grab onto the wreckage of what was falling apart and try to reassemble it. And they would succeed. Sort of. The relationship would return to shaky ground. The career would continue with renewed but hollow determination, and from the music outside it would look like recovery, like they had weathered the storm. But Jung knew what they were carrying now. He called it the pain of the unlived life. The particular weight of music, a person who came to the edge of becoming something genuine and turned back not because they lacked the music strength, because they could not tolerate not knowing for long enough. There is an image that has always helped me understand this threshold. Think music about the space between 2 breaths. After you exhale completely, and before you inhale again, there is a moment of music, absolute suspension. Nothing moving, nothing happening from the inside. It can feel like panic if you are paying attention to it, like the air might never return. But that pause is not emptiness. It is the moment the body reorganizes itself to receive the next breath. The stillness is not the absence of life. It is the condition for life's continuation. The gap between your old chapter and your new one works the music same way. The void that feels like nothing is actually music where the new self is taking shape. The emptiness is not the absence of meaning. It is the space where meaning, music, that is actually yours. Meaning not inherited or performed or borrowed from anyone else's idea of what your life should look like, is quietly gathering the strength to emerge. Elena reached this gap 3 separate times over the course of a year and a half. 3 times she picked up the phone to call her old managing partner and ask for her position back. 3 times something stopped her. Not wisdom exactly. She described it as a physical sensation, a tightness in her chest that came when her hand touched the phone, as though her body knew something her mind was still arguing about. She did not call. She stayed in the gap, and what came through was not what she expected. But before we get there, there is something happening in the darkness itself that almost no one understands. Something that the gap is doing to you even when it feels like nothing is happening at all. 5. What the darkness is actually doing music to you. People are taught to endure the darkness, to survive it, to white-knuckle through it until the light returns. Jung had a completely different relationship with it. He did not want his patients to endure the darkness. He wanted them to see what was alive inside music, because the darkness, the real psychological darkness of the threshold period, is not music inert. It is not an absence. It is the most active, most purposeful space a human being can inhabit. And what it is doing, if you let it, is something the light never could. The alchemist described 3 stages in the transformation music of base material into gold. The first was the negrado, the blackening and dissolution. The second music was something they called the albedo, the whitening, the stage where light begins music to penetrate the darkness, where what was dissolved starts to become visible in ways it never was before. The third music was the rubo, the rening, the final integration into gold. Most people in the threshold period are living in the negrado and music waiting for the rubo. They are enduring the dissolution and waiting music for the gold, but they are skipping the stage that makes the gold possible. Jung wrote something that sits music in the chest like a stone when you are ready to hear it. He wrote, "Music, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will music, call it fate." Think about what that means in practice. The thing you have been calling love might be the fear music of being abandoned. The thing you have been calling responsibility might be a lifelong compulsion to make yourself music necessary so that you cannot be rejected. The thing you have been calling strength music might be an inability to ask for help that began as a survival strategy. Snorts before you were old enough music to drive a car. None of these realizations are failures. They are the albedo, the light music penetrating the dissolution. And this seeing, this uncomfortable, music-honest, unflinching seeing, is the step that most people skip, and the reason most people never fully reach music, the other side. The shadow, as Jung understood it, does not become music dangerous when it is seen. It becomes dangerous when it is denied. When the parts of you that were rejected, suppressed music, or locked away operate invisibly, they function as the hidden architecture of your entire life. Your reactions, your patterns, your choices in relationships, your inexplicable self-sabotage, all of it sourced from somewhere you cannot music access because you have never turned the light on in that room. There is a practical question that opens this stage, and it does not require a therapist or a meditation retreat or years of music journaling. It is simply this: the most intense emotional reaction, music, you have had in the last month. What is it actually about? Music. Not the surface reason, not the story you told yourself or someone else. What is underneath music? What wound does it touch? What fear does it confirm? That question, held honestly without rushing music to answer it, is the doorway into the albedo, and walking through that music doorway is the single most important thing you can do in the darkness. Because what you find there is not a monster. It is the part of you that has music been waiting the longest to be seen. The unlived impulse, the buried creativity, the authentic need that you learned very young to music. pretend did not exist. Once it is seen, it cannot, music, be unseen. Once it is integrated, it stops being fate. It becomes energy, the most powerful music energy you have ever had access to, because it has been held under pressure for years, and it is finally music-free. 6. The moment everything music turns into its opposite, the period of deepest isolation, the one that feels like you have been permanently, music, separated from every genuine connection you ever had, almost always precedes the arrival of the most authentic relationships, music, of a person's life. The moment of most complete meaninglessness, when nothing you have ever believed in seems to hold music. Any truth often gives birth to a sense of purpose so precise and personal that it carries a quality the borrowed sense of purpose never did. The time when music a person feels most completely lost, most disoriented, most certain that they have taken music a wrong turn somewhere irreversible, is frequently the exact music period when they are for the first time heading in the right direction. This is not wishful music thinking. This is what happens when the ego's agenda finally exhausts itself. When all the planning and music strategy and forced optimism run out of fuel, the deeper intelligence, music of the psyche, finally gets a chance to speak. And this deeper intelligence music has been paying attention to everything your conscious mind was too busy performing to notice. There is something else that happens in music, this enantiodromia, something Jung called synchronicity. He described it as music, an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. When you are in the threshold, when your interior is reorganizing itself at the most fundamental level, you begin noticing things you would not have noticed before. Not because those things, music, were not always there, but because the ego in its ordinary state of control and performance filters out enormous amounts of information that does not serve its existing narrative. When the ego loosens its grip, that filter lifts. The book, music, that falls open to exactly the page you needed. The stranger who says the thing you, music, have been trying to understand for months. The conversation that arrives at the precise moment a door was, music, closing. Jung did not think these were supernatural events. He thought they were the natural result of music, a psyche that was finally permeable, finally open to music signals it had been blocking. I'm going to suggest music, something here, and I want you to sit with it honestly. The fact that you are watching this video right now at this particular moment in your life is not a music coincidence. Not because this video is magical, but because you, music, are because whatever is moving in, you is moving towards something, and music is finding its way to what it needs. Snorts. That is not mysticism. That is the mechanism Jung music spent his life describing. Elena did not find her next chapter through planning. She was not strategic about it. She was not following a program, music, or executing a vision board. What happened was quieter and more surprising than any of that. A conversation at a friend's dinner party, music, with a woman who ran a small nonprofit supporting women through divorce. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Elena could not stop thinking about it for 3 weeks afterward. She felt something she had not felt since she was a student, since before she knew what she was supposed to become. She felt drawn towards something without any logical reason to justify it, without a financial case, without a career ladder, without anything the old Elena would have recognized as a valid reason to make a music change. Jung would have recognized it immediately. When the ego's agenda is finally exhausted, he wrote, the deeper intelligence of the psyche gets a chance to express itself, and it moves not through logic, but through something more like gravity, toward what is actually true, toward what has always been true and could not get through while the performance was running. The new chapter, when it comes, rarely looks like what the old self would have chosen, and that is exactly how you know it is real. 7. The best chapter doesn't look like what you imagined. The best chapter of your life will not arrive the way the old chapters did. Not through goal setting, not through a better plan or a stronger morning routine or a more disciplined version of the person you have already been. It arrives through something Jung music called emergence. A reorganization so deep and so fundamental that your entire relationship with being alive begins to shift. Not your circumstances at first, your interior, the quality of your attention, the way you move through an ordinary day, the things that can finally reach you now that could not get through before. There is a concept Jung returned to quietly throughout his life, one that almost no one in the world of self-improvement ever talks about. He called it the unlived life, the version of you that existed as a real music possibility before the persona was constructed. The self that was forming before you learned what was acceptable, snorts, and what needed to be hidden. Before you understood which parts of yourself were welcome in the room and which ones had to wait outside. That version of you did not disappear. It went underground, and it has been living there ever since, expressing itself in the only ways it could, as a vague longing you cannot locate, as grief that arrives without a clear cause, as the strange, specific envy you feel when you watch certain people live with a freedom you told yourself was impractical, as the dream that keeps returning, the one you wake from and carry with you longer than you should. Jung wrote something about this that I want you to really hear. He wrote that the unlived life is the source of neurosis, not the painful life, not the difficult life, the unlived one, the one you quietly set aside to become the person the world, music, needed you to be. So here is what the darkness has actually been doing. The dissolution, the negrado, the long disorienting collapse of everything that used to hold its shape. It is not the end of you. It is the unlived life pressing back through the surface. It is the person you almost became, finally gathering enough force to break through the false structure and insist on existing. This is what the best chapter is made from, not new achievements stacked onto the old foundation, a life rebuilt from what is actually true about you. Jung called this the second half of life, and he was very clear that it has nothing to do with age. Some people arrive at this threshold at 28, some at 62, and some never arrive at all. They spend music their entire lives in the first chapter, the one built from inherited expectations, music, and borrowed scripts, and never discover what was waiting beneath it, the accumulated weight of everything everyone who ever shaped them needed them to become. And then to decide quietly and without drama that the years ahead will not be built the same way. The people who come through the threshold, Jung music observed,